The observation ship floated in the darkness, invisible to both sides of the coming battle. Ambassador Krelvox sat at his station, preparing his recording equipment for what he expected would be another routine documentation. He had done this 17 times before. 17 civilizations had fallen to the Harvester Armada, and he had watched every single defeat from the safety of his cloaked vessel. This time would be no different. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and clearly unprepared for what was coming. Krelvox had reviewed their military capabilities. Primitive kinetic weapons, basic energy shields, ships that looked like they had been built in a hurry. The Galactic Council had sent him here to record their extinction, nothing more. The Harvester fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel first. 200 massive warships, each one larger than anything humanity had built. They moved into formation with practiced ease, surrounding the human defense station called Olympus. The station hung in space like a metal flower, its weapons pointed outward in every direction. Krelvox zoomed his cameras in on the human fleet. 40 vessels. Some were proper warships, but many looked like converted cargo ships and mining vessels. He shook his head slowly. The humans didn't stand a chance. The Harvester commander broadcast a message on all frequencies. Krelvox translated it automatically. Surrender or die. Simple. Direct. The same message they always sent. He waited for the human response. Most species took a few hours to discuss their options. Some begged for mercy. Others tried to negotiate. None of it ever worked. The Harvesters didn't negotiate. They took what they wanted, and they wanted everything. But the human response came immediately. A single word. No. Krelvox blinked in surprise. He checked his translation matrix, thinking perhaps he had made an error. But no, the message was clear. The humans were refusing to surrender. The first human fighter squadrons launched from Olympus Station. Small craft, no bigger than personal shuttles, swarmed toward the Harvester fleet. Krelvox counted them. Maybe 200 fighters total. They looked like insects attacking giants. One of those fighters was piloted by Lieutenant Jake Morrison. He was 26 years old, had been flying for 3 years, and had never seen real combat before today. His hands gripped the controls tightly as he led his squadron of 8 fighters toward the enemy fleet. "Stay tight," Jake said into his communication system. "Watch your spacing. Don't be a hero." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Everyone in his squadron knew this was probably a one-way trip. But nobody said that out loud. They just flew forward, weapons armed, hearts pounding. The Harvesters opened fire first. Energy beams cut through space, vaporizing 3 human fighters in the opening seconds. Jake jerked his controls, dodging a blast that would have killed him. His wingman wasn't as lucky. The fighter exploded in a ball of flame that disappeared almost instantly in the vacuum of space. "Break and attack," Jake shouted. "Go, go, go!" His squadron scattered, each pilot choosing their own target. Jake aimed for a Harvester cruiser's weapons array. His missiles streaked forward, impacting against the enemy shields. The shields flickered but held. He fired again. Still nothing. On the bridge of the carrier Defiant, Captain Helen Price watched the battle unfold on her tactical display. Every red dot was a Harvester ship. Every blue dot was human. The red dots outnumbered the blue by an enormous margin. "All ships maintain formation," Helen ordered. Her voice was calm, even though her heart was racing. "Focus fire on their command vessels. Target their bridge sections." She knew it was a desperate strategy. Even if they took out the command ships, the Harvesters could operate independently. But it was the only chance they had. Disrupt their coordination and maybe, just maybe, they could create enough chaos to survive. The Defiant's main guns fired, sending massive projectiles toward a Harvester dreadnought. The shots slammed into the enemy shields, creating ripples of energy. Other human ships joined in, concentrating their fire on the same target. Slowly, gradually, the shields began to fail. But the Harvesters were firing back. A beam weapon struck one of the human destroyers, cutting it in half. Another ship simply exploded as its reactor was breached. Helen watched her fleet dying, one ship at a time, and forced herself to keep giving orders. Down in the lower decks of Olympus Station, Sergeant Nicole Grant led her boarding team through the corridors. They weren't supposed to be boarding anything. They were supposed to be evacuating. But Nicole had seen an opportunity and taken it. A damaged Harvester cruiser had drifted too close to the station. Its shields were down and it was venting atmosphere. Nicole gathered 12 volunteers and used an emergency shuttle to reach the enemy ship. Now they moved through alien corridors, weapons ready, looking for anything they could use. The Harvester crew was dead or dying. The ship's systems were failing. But the weapons still worked, and that's what Nicole wanted. "Plant the override codes," she ordered. "We're taking control of this ship." One of her team members, a technician named Danny, connected his equipment to the alien computers. "This is crazy, Sarge. Even if we get control, we don't know how to fly this thing." "We don't need to fly it," Nicole said. "We just need to point its guns at their fleet and pull the trigger." It took 20 minutes to hack the systems. 20 minutes while the battle raged outside. 20 minutes while more humans died. But finally Danny got through. "I've got it," he said. "Weapons are online. Targeting system is crude, but it works." Nicole moved to the weapons controls. Through the cracked viewports, she could see the Harvester fleet. So many targets. She chose the closest command ship and fired. The cruiser's weapons, massive beam cannons designed to crack planets, struck the Harvester command ship from behind. The shields never had a chance. The beam punched through the hull, through the bridge, and out the other side. The command ship began to break apart. Krelvox watched in shock as the Harvester fleet suddenly lost coordination. Ships collided with each other. Weapons fire went wild. The humans had done something impossible. They had turned a Harvester ship against its own fleet, but the cost was terrible. Half the human fighters were gone. 3 of their capital ships were destroyed. Olympus Station was burning, venting atmosphere from dozens of breaches. Jake Morrison's fighter limped through the debris field, 1 engine dead, shields gone. He had somehow survived the first hour of combat. Looking at his display, he saw that his squadron of 8 was down to 3, 5 friends gone. Just like that. "All fighters fall back to the Defiant," Captain Helen Price ordered. "We're forming a final defensive line." Jake wanted to laugh. Final defensive line. That's what you called it when you had nothing left. When retreat wasn't possible and surrender wasn't an option. When all that remained was to die fighting. But then something changed. The Harvester fleet began to pull back. Not a full retreat, but a repositioning. They were regrouping, reassessing. For the first time in recorded history, the Harvesters had been hurt badly enough to pause. Commander Paul Davidson, the tactical officer on the Defiant, saw the opportunity immediately. "Captain, they're vulnerable. If we press now, we can break their formation completely." Helen looked at her fleet status. 20 ships left, maybe 100 fighters, thousands of crew already dead. Pushing forward meant more casualties, maybe a lot more. But pulling back meant the Harvesters would regroup and finish them. "All ships," Helen said quietly. "One more push. Everything we have, for everyone we've lost." The human fleet surged forward. Cargo ships loaded with reactor cores rammed into Harvester vessels, detonating like massive bombs. Mining ships used their industrial cutters as weapons, slicing through enemy hulls. Every human vessel became a weapon, even if it meant their destruction. Nicole Grant and her team fired the captured cruiser's weapons again and again until the ship's power systems failed. Then they rigged the reactor to explode and evacuated in their shuttle. The cruiser detonated inside the Harvester formation, taking 2 more enemy ships with it. The battle lasted 72 hours. 3 days of continuous fighting. No sleep, no rest, just survival. When it finally ended, the Harvester fleet retreated. They jumped to faster-than-light speed and disappeared, leaving their dead behind. The humans had won. Krelvox sat in his observation ship, staring at his recordings. He had forgotten to document the last half of the battle. He had been too stunned to remember his duty. The human fleet hung in space, broken and bleeding. Of the 40 ships that started the battle, 16 remained. Of the 200 fighters, fewer than 40 survived. Olympus Station was a shattered wreck, but they had won. Krelvox began to write his report to the Galactic Council, but he found himself unable to describe what he had witnessed. How could he explain what he had seen? How could he make them understand? The humans had fought like no species he had ever observed. They had used every resource, every tactic, every desperate gamble. They had turned civilian ships into weapons. They had boarded enemy vessels. They had refused to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. And somehow, impossibly, they had survived. But as Krelvox looked at the shattered human fleet, he realized something. Victory came with a price. and he suspected that price was higher than anyone could measure. 3 weeks passed before Krelvox received permission to visit human territory. The Galactic Council reviewed his initial report and dismissed it as exaggerated. They didn't believe that any species could defeat the Harvesters. They certainly didn't believe humans could do it. But Krelvox had the recordings. He had the evidence, and more importantly, he had questions that needed answers. He used his personal diplomatic credentials to request a visit, claiming it was necessary to complete his observations. The humans granted permission immediately. They even sent an escort ship to guide him to the medical station sanctuary, which orbited near where Olympus Station used to be. As Krelvox's ship approached, he saw the debris field first. Thousands of pieces of metal floating in space, parts of ships, parts of the station. Each piece represented something that had been destroyed, someone who had died. The medical station sanctuary was enormous, 3 times larger than most hospitals Krelvox had seen. But as he docked, he understood why. The corridors were filled with wounded. Beds lined every hallway. Medical staff rushed between patients, their faces showing exhaustion that went beyond mere tiredness. A human woman met him at the airlock. She wore medical clothing covered in stains. Her eyes had dark circles under them, and her hands shook slightly as she offered a greeting. Ambassador Krelvox, welcome. I'm Dr. Lisa Murphy, Chief Medical Officer. I apologize for the chaos. We weren't prepared for this many casualties. Krelvox looked around at the crowded corridors. How many wounded? Currently, we have 8,000 patients in a facility designed for 2,000. We've converted cargo bays, dining areas, even storage rooms into medical wards. Every available space has someone in it. She led him through the station. The sounds were overwhelming. Medical equipment beeping, people groaning in pain, staff calling for assistance, and underlying it all a quiet desperation. They stopped at a bed where a young man lay covered in bandages. His skin showed signs of severe burns and machines surrounded him, keeping him alive. This is Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Dr. Murphy said softly. He was a fighter pilot, flew through a Harvester weapon barrage to destroy their flagship's shield generator. The radiation exposure should have killed him instantly. Somehow he survived. Jake's eyes opened slightly. He looked at Krelvox with a gaze that seemed much older than his 26 years. Ambassador, Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. You watched the battle. I did, Krelvox admitted. Then you saw what we did. What it cost us? Jake closed his eyes again. Dr. Murphy checked his monitors and adjusted something on one of the machines. His recovery will take years, she said. If he recovers at all. The radiation damaged his cells at a fundamental level. We're keeping him alive, but we don't know if we can truly heal him. They moved to another section of the station. Here the injuries were different. People with missing limbs. Soldiers who would never walk again. Crew members who had lost eyes, arms, legs. Dr. Murphy stopped at a bed where a young woman sat in a wheelchair. She was maybe 30 years old, with red hair and bright green eyes. Both her legs ended at the knees, wrapped in clean bandages. Ambassador, this is Lieutenant Amy Cooper. She was an engineer on Olympus Station. Amy looked up and smiled. The smile seemed genuine, which surprised Krelvox. Hello, Ambassador. Forgive me for not standing. She laughed at her own joke. Dr. Murphy winced, but Amy just shook her head. What happened to you? Krelvox asked. I was in the lower engineering section when the evacuation order came. 300 people were trapped below me. The blast doors wouldn't close automatically, so I stayed to seal them manually. Saved everyone below, but the power failed while I was still in the door mechanism. She gestured at her legs. Lost them both. But those 300 people got out alive. Worth it, Krelvox stared at her. You seem remarkably calm about this. Calm? No, but what's the alternative? Spend the rest of my life angry? I made a choice. I'd make it again. Doesn't mean I'm happy about it, but I can accept it. Dr. Murphy led Krelvox away. As they walked, she explained that Amy was one of the lucky ones. Many patients couldn't accept what had happened to them. Depression was common. Some had stopped eating. Others refused treatment. The physical wounds we can treat, Dr. Murphy said. The mental ones are much harder. They entered a specialized ward where the lighting was softer and the rooms more private. This was the psychiatric section. Dr. Murphy introduced Krelvox to Dr. Kevin Hayes, a therapist who specialized in trauma. We have over 6,000 patients showing signs of severe psychological trauma, Dr. Hayes explained. That's about 60% of the survivors we've treated. Many witness things they can't process. Others carry guilt for surviving when their friends died. He took them to a private room where Sergeant Nicole Grant sat on a bed, staring at nothing. She didn't acknowledge their presence. Sergeant Grant led the boarding team that captured the Harvester cruiser. Dr. Hayes said quietly. She saved countless lives with that action. But 13 people went with her. Only 2 came back. Krelvox approached carefully. Sergeant Grant? Nicole's eyes focused on him slowly. I know you. You're the alien who watched us fight. The observer. Yes. Did you see my team die? Did you record it? Krelvox didn't know how to answer. He had recorded the boarding action, yes. He had documented the explosion that killed most of her team. I see them every time I close my eyes, Nicole said. Danny, who hacked their systems. Sarah, who covered our retreat. Marcus, who stayed behind to set the reactor to overload. All of them. Every single face. She looked at Krelvox directly. We won the battle. Everyone says we won. But it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like I killed my team. Dr. Hayes gently guided Krelvox out of the room. She has nightmares every night. Wakes up screaming. We're trying different treatments, but trauma this severe doesn't heal quickly. They left the medical station and traveled to the lunar surface, where humans were constructing something. Krelvox saw thousands of workers building what looked like a memorial. Black stone walls stretched across several acres, and people were carefully engraving names into the surface. Dr. Murphy had left, but another human joined him here. A man in simple work clothes, his hands dirty from the construction. He looked familiar. Commander Davidson? Krelvox said, recognizing him from the battle recordings. Former commander? Paul Davidson corrected. I resigned my commission last week. I'm here to help build this memorial. Why would you resign? You won the battle. Paul laughed bitterly. I won? Ambassador, I sent 40,000 people to their deaths. 40,000. I gave orders that resulted in families losing parents, children, siblings. I watched ships explode because I ordered them into combat. He knelt down and continued engraving a name into the black stone. Each letter was carefully carved, taking several minutes to complete. This memorial will hold every name, every single person who died, and I'm going to carve as many as I can myself. Surely others could do this work, Krelvox said. They could, but I need to do it. I need to write these names. I need to feel the weight of every single person who died because of my orders. Paul finished one name and moved to the next. Do you know what command really means, Ambassador? It means living with your decisions. It means carrying the weight of everyone who trusted you. I'll carry this weight for the rest of my life. Krelvox watched as Paul worked. Other workers moved around them, all engaged in the same task. Carving names. Remembering the dead, how many names? Krelvox asked. 40,217. Every person who died in the battle or from injuries sustained during it. Every name will be here. Every person will be remembered. They worked in silence for hours. Krelvox simply observed, taking in the scene. Humans carefully honoring their dead. No celebration of victory. No triumphant speeches. Just quiet remembrance. As the day ended, Paul stood up and stretched his back. He looked at the walls of names. So many already completed. So many more to go. You're wondering why we're doing this, Paul said. Why we're spending so much time and effort remembering the dead instead of celebrating our survival. The question had occurred to me, Krelvox admitted, because forgetting them would be worse than death itself. These people gave everything so humanity could survive. The least we can do is remember them properly, not as numbers in a report, not as statistics, as individuals, as people who mattered. Paul picked up his tools again. I'll be here every day until this is finished. However long it takes. They deserve that much. Krelvox returned to his ship that evening, his mind full of what he had witnessed. The medical station with its thousands of wounded. The psychiatric ward with its trauma patients. The memorial being built by hand, name by name. He began writing his second report to the Galactic Council. But again he found himself struggling to explain what he had seen. The humans had won the battle. That was undeniable, but the victory had broken something in them. Not their spirit exactly, but their innocence, their certainty, their simple view of the universe. They had learned what war really cost, and they were paying that cost every single day. Krelvox returned to the Galactic Council with his complete report. He presented everything he had documented. The battle itself, the medical stations overflowing with wounded, the psychiatric wards full of traumatized soldiers, the memorial being built one name at a time. The council chamber was silent as they reviewed his materials. Then the questions began. "These humans are broken," one council member stated. "They won their battle, but at a cost that has crippled them. They are not a threat to anyone." "They lost over 60% of their fleet," another added. "It will take them a century to rebuild. By that time, the harvesters may return and finish what they started." Krelvox tried to explain what he had seen, the determination in Paul Davidson's eyes as he carved names, the strength it took for Amy Cooper to smile despite losing her legs, the way Dr. Murphy kept working despite obvious exhaustion, but the council dismissed his observations. They saw only the numbers, the casualties, the destroyed ships, the wounded. To them, humanity was finished as a military power. They thanked Krelvox for his report and assigned him to observe another species that was about to face the harvesters. Business as usual, another civilization to watch die. But Krelvox couldn't let it go. He used his personal resources to maintain contact with human space. He established communication with several people he had met. Dr. Murphy, Paul Davidson, even Nicole Grant through her therapist. And he watched as the aftermath continued to spread through human society. 6 months after the battle, a human engineer named Troy Banks designed a new class of warship. The designs were revolutionary, incorporating every lesson learned from fighting the harvesters. Stronger shields, better weapons, improved armor. But Troy was working himself to death. He slept at his desk. He forgot to eat. His colleagues worried about his health, but he refused to rest. Krelvox managed to speak with him through a video call. Troy looked terrible. His eyes were sunken. His hands shook from too much caffeine and too little sleep. "I have to finish these designs," Troy said. "Every day I waste is another day our fleet isn't ready for the next attack. They'll come back. The harvesters always come back, and when they do, we need to be ready." "But you're destroying yourself," Krelvox said. "Better me than thousands of soldiers. I lost my brother in the battle. He was a gunner on the destroyer Valor. The ship's shields failed because they weren't strong enough. If I can design better shields, if I can save even one person from dying like he did, then it's worth it." Troy went back to his work. Krelvox could only watch as the human pushed himself beyond reasonable limits. Other humans were doing the same thing. A civilian woman named Linda Shaw had lost her daughter in the battle. Her daughter had been a fighter pilot, shot down in the first hour of combat. But instead of collapsing into grief, Linda created an organization to help veterans and survivors. It started small, a few people meeting in her living room, talking about their experiences, sharing their pain, supporting each other. But it grew quickly. Within months, Linda's organization had chapters across human space. Krelvox attended one of their meetings remotely. He watched as veterans spoke about their experiences, about the nightmares, the guilt, the pain of surviving when friends died, and he watched as others listened and offered support. Linda addressed the group at the end. "We can't change what happened. We can't bring back those we lost, but we can help each other carry the weight. We can make sure no one suffers alone." The organization expanded beyond just veterans. They helped families who lost loved ones. They provided counseling. They assisted with medical bills. They found housing for those who couldn't work. "We take care of our own," Linda said in an interview. "It's the least we can do for people who gave everything." Captain Helen Price had also left active combat duty. She now trained the next generation of officers at the Human Military Academy. Krelvox managed to get permission to attend one of her lectures. The classroom was full of young humans, maybe 20 years old. Eager faces, bright eyes. They probably dreamed of glory and adventure. Helen stood at the front of the room and spoke quietly. "I'm going to tell you what command really means. Not the romantic version, not the glorious version. The real version." She pulled up images on the display screen. Ships exploding. People dying. The aftermath of battle. You will send people to die. That's not a possibility. That's a certainty. You will give orders, and some of those orders will result in deaths. Good people. Brave people. People who trusted you. And you will live with those decisions for the rest of your life. The classroom was silent. If you can't accept that weight, resign now. There's no shame in it. Command is not about glory. It's not about honor or medals. It's about carrying a burden so others don't have to. It's about making impossible decisions and living with the consequences. Half the students looked terrified. The other half looked more determined than before. Helen continued. I commanded the Defiant during the Harvester battle. I gave orders that resulted in thousands of deaths. I sent fighters into combat knowing many wouldn't return. I ordered ships to ram the enemy, killing their entire crews. I did what was necessary to win. She paused, her eyes distant. And I will remember every single person who died following my orders. Every name. Every face. That's the real cost of command. Not the stress during battle, but the weight you carry afterward. One student raised a hand. Was it worth it? The victory? Helen considered the question carefully. That's not for me to decide. The people who died can't tell us if their sacrifice was worth it. The survivors are still dealing with the trauma. Maybe in 100 years, humanity will look back and say, yes, it was worth it. But right now we're just trying to survive the aftermath. Krelvox recorded the lecture and sent it to the Galactic Council. They needed to understand what was happening. Humanity wasn't just recovering from the battle. They were learning from it. They were changing because of it, but the Council still didn't understand. They saw Helen's lecture as proof that humans were traumatized and weak. They didn't see the strength it took to face trauma honestly. Meanwhile, human society continued to transform. Artists created works about the battle. Not glorious paintings of heroic combat, but honest depictions of war's horror. Sculptures of wounded soldiers. Poems about loss and grief. Music that captured the sound of mourning. Schools taught children about the battle, but not as a triumphant victory. They taught about the cost, the sacrifice, the importance of remembering. Children grew up understanding that war was not glorious. It was necessary sometimes, but always terrible. Krelvox observed all of this from a distance. He watched as humanity processed their trauma collectively. They didn't hide from it. They didn't pretend it hadn't affected them. They faced it directly, honestly, painfully. Other species in the galaxy began to notice. 3 neighboring civilizations reached out to humanity, requesting defensive alliances. They had heard that humans had defeated the Harvesters. They wanted that same protection. The Galactic Council tried to suppress this information. They didn't want humans becoming a military power. They preferred humanity to remain isolated and weakened. But information spreads. Soon dozens of species knew the truth. Humanity had fought the Harvesters and survived. Not easily, not without cost, but they had survived. Some species were afraid. A civilization that could endure such trauma and continue fighting was dangerous, unpredictable, better to avoid them. Other species were curious. They wanted to understand how humanity had achieved what seemed impossible. They sent diplomats and observers just like Krelvox, and a few species felt something else. Hope. If humanity could defeat the Harvesters, maybe others could too. Maybe the Harvesters weren't invincible after all. Krelvox compiled all his observations into a 3rd report. This one was longer than the previous 2 combined. He detailed everything he had witnessed over the past year. The way humans had transformed their pain into purpose, how they had built support systems for survivors, how they had changed their military training to reflect the reality of war's cost. He presented this report to the Galactic Council with a simple conclusion. Humanity is not broken. They are transforming. And that transformation will change the balance of power in this galaxy. The Council debated for weeks. Some members agreed with Krelvox. Others insisted humanity was too damaged to matter. A few suggested that humanity should be contained before they became a threat. In the end, the Council decided to maintain minimal contact with humanity. They would observe but not interfere. They would watch but not engage. Humanity would be left to either recover or collapse on their own. Krelvox disagreed strongly with this decision. He argued that humanity deserved support, that they had proven themselves worthy of respect, that their approach to trauma and recovery could teach the entire galaxy important lessons. His arguments fell on deaf ears. The Council had made their decision. So Krelvox made his own decision. He resigned from his position as ambassador. He gave up his rank, his status, his comfortable life in the Council, and he requested asylum in human space. The request surprised everyone, humans and aliens alike. Why would a Galactic Council ambassador want to live among humans? What could he possibly gain from it? but the humans accepted his request immediately. The Galactic Council chambers looked the same as they always had. Tall ceilings, elegant decorations, representatives from dozens of species sitting in organized rows. Krelvox had spent decades in this room, but now he felt like an outsider. He stood at the speaker's platform, invited to present his final report on humanity. 2 years had passed since his resignation, but the council still wanted his observations. They needed to understand what humanity had become. The chamber was full. Every council member attended, along with dozens of observers. Word had spread that former Ambassador Krelvox would speak about the species that had defeated the Harvesters. Everyone wanted to hear what he would say. Krelvox activated the display screens. Images appeared showing the battle, the aftermath, the memorial, the recovery. Everything he had witnessed and documented over the past 2 years. "I have observed humanity closely," he began. "I watched them fight. I watched them suffer. I watched them heal. And I can no longer unsee what I have witnessed." He showed footage of the battle, ships exploding, fighters swarming like insects, the desperate boarding action, the impossible victory. "When I first observed the battle, I expected humanity to fall like the 17 civilizations before them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, unprepared. But they fought with a creativity and determination I had never witnessed." Some council members nodded. They had read his reports. They knew humanity had won, but the battle was only the beginning, Krelvox continued. What happened afterward revealed the true nature of humanity. He showed images of the medical stations. Wounded soldiers, traumatized veterans, people missing limbs, people screaming from nightmares. Many of you concluded that humanity was broken by their victory, that the cost was too high, that they would never recover. More nods. That was indeed the council's official assessment. "You were wrong," Krelvox said firmly. "Humanity is not broken. They are honest." He explained what he had witnessed, how humans faced their trauma directly instead of hiding it, how they built support systems for survivors, how they changed their society to reflect the reality of war's cost. "Most species either glorify war or deny its reality," Krelvox said. "Humanity does neither. They acknowledge both the necessity and the horror. They understand that sometimes fighting is required, and they hate that fact." He showed footage of the memorial ceremony, 40,000 names being read aloud, people standing in silence for hours, the quiet grief and remembrance. "This is strength," Krelvox said. "The strength to face painful truths. The strength to remember honestly. The strength to carry the weight of what you've done." One council member interrupted. "But they are damaged. Their soldiers suffer from psychological trauma. Their society is obsessed with remembering the dead. This is not strength. This is weakness." Krelvox turned to face the speaker directly. "Is it weakness to acknowledge pain? Is it weakness to help those who suffer? Is it weakness to remember those who died?" He pulled up statistics. Humanity lost 40,000 people in the battle. They have since lost another 2,000 to suicide. Those numbers horrify them. They track every single death. They try to prevent more. They build support networks and therapy programs. They dedicate enormous resources to helping survivors. Compare that to other species. The Keltheran Empire lost similar numbers in their war against the Harvesters. They declared it a glorious victory and moved on. No support for veterans. No acknowledgement of trauma. Within 5 years, they had lost 10,000 more to suicide and addiction, but they never tracked those numbers. They never even noticed. The chamber fell silent. "Humanity's honesty about suffering is not weakness," Krelvox continued. "It is strength. They see the cost clearly and work to minimize it. Other species hide from the cost and let it destroy them slowly." He showed more footage. Captain Helen Price teaching her students about the real cost of command. Troy Banks designing better ships to protect future soldiers. Linda Shaw's organization helping thousands of veterans heal. "Humanity learned from their experience," Krelvox said. "They didn't just survive the battle. They let it change them. They built systems to protect their people. They trained their officers to understand the weight of command. They support their veterans instead of abandoning them." Another council member spoke. "But what does this mean for the galaxy? Are humans a threat or an ally?" Krelvox considered the question carefully. "Humanity is dangerous, yes, but not in the way you fear. They are dangerous because they cannot be broken. You can hurt them. You can traumatize them. You can make them suffer. But they will face that suffering honestly and find ways to heal. They are also the only species I have observed who might actually defeat the Harvesters permanently, not because they have superior weapons or numbers, but because they learn from every battle. They adapt. They change. They refuse to repeat mistakes. He pulled up his final conclusion. The Galactic Council has 3 options. First, embrace humanity as an ally. Learn from their approach to war and trauma. Build a stronger galaxy together. Second, maintain the current policy of minimal contact. Watch from a distance as humanity either rises or falls. This is the safest option but also wastes an opportunity. Third, try to contain or control humanity. This would be a mistake. Humanity has proven they cannot be intimidated. Threats will only make them more determined. The council debated for hours after Krelvox finished his presentation. Some members wanted to embrace humanity. Others feared them. A few suggested military action to contain the threat. In the end, the council voted to maintain minimal contact. They would observe but not interfere. They would watch but not engage. Humanity would continue to be isolated. Krelvox was disappointed but not surprised. The council was old and set in its ways. They feared change. They feared anything that challenged their understanding of the galaxy. He left the chambers and returned to human space. He had done what he could. The rest was up to humanity. Back at the military academy, Captain Helen Price greeted him with a smile. "How did it go?" "As expected," Krelvox said. "They don't understand." "They may never understand. That's their loss," Helen said. "We don't need their approval. We just need to keep doing what we're doing. Surviving, learning, growing." They walked through the academy together. Students rushed past, heading to classes. Young humans learning to be officers, learning about tactics and strategy, but also about trauma and responsibility. "You asked me once why I resigned from the council," Krelvox said. "Why I gave up everything to live among humans. I remember. I've been thinking about my answer. I said it was because humanity is honest. But it's more than that." They stopped in a courtyard where a small memorial stood. Just a simple stone with an inscription. "We remember, we honor, we learn." "I watched humanity fight," Krelvox said. "I saw the desperate battle, the terrible cost, the long aftermath. And I realized something. Every species I had observed before, they fought and then tried to forget. They wanted to move past the trauma, to pretend it hadn't affected them, but humanity doesn't forget. You remember. You carry the weight. You let it change you. And that's what makes you different." Helen nodded slowly. "The weight never goes away. But you learn to carry it. You learn to live with it. And eventually you learn to use it to build something better." They continued walking. Krelvox saw Jake Morrison teaching a class on fighter tactics. He still moved carefully, still bore the scars of radiation burns. But he was sharing what he had learned, helping the next generation avoid his mistakes. In another building, Amy Cooper worked as an engineering consultant. Her prosthetic legs didn't slow her down. She moved between workstations, offering advice, reviewing designs. She had turned her experience into expertise. Nicole Grant was there too, working part-time as a counselor for students dealing with stress and anxiety. She understood trauma better than most. She could help others navigate their own pain. Paul Davidson had returned to active duty, but in a different role. He coordinated humanitarian missions, using the military to help people rather than fight. He carried his guilt with him, but he had found a way to make it meaningful. Troy Banks finally completed his new warship designs. The first vessels were being built now, incorporating every lesson from the battle: better shields, improved weapons, systems designed to protect the crew. Each ship was a memorial to those who had died in poorly designed vessels. Linda Shaw's organization continued to grow. They helped thousands of veterans, supported grieving families, provided resources for anyone affected by the war. The work was endless, but so was Linda's determination. Everywhere Krelvox looked, he saw humans who had been hurt by war, but refused to be broken by it. They carried their scars, both physical and emotional. But they used those scars to build something better. That evening, Krelvox stood in his office at the academy, looking at the memorial garden through the window. The names glowed softly in the evening light. 40,217. Each one remembered, each one honored. He thought about the question Helen had asked. Why had he really given up everything to live among humans? The answer was simple. He couldn't unsee what he had witnessed. The desperate fight, the terrible cost, the long aftermath, the quiet strength of people who faced their pain honestly. 2 years had passed since the battle. 2 years of recovery, rebuilding, and remembering. Krelvox had spent those years living among humans, teaching at their military academy and continuing to observe how they dealt with the aftermath of war. The invitation arrived on a quiet morning. It was simple, written on physical paper rather than sent electronically. The humans still preferred paper for important things, Krelvox had learned. It made things feel more real, more permanent. You are invited to attend the dedication ceremony of the memorial garden. Your presence would honor both the fallen and the survivors. The ceremony was scheduled for the following week on Earth, at the site where the memorial had been constructed. Krelvox accepted immediately. When he arrived, he was shocked by how many people had gathered. Thousands filled the area around the memorial, maybe tens of thousands. They stood in quiet groups, speaking in hushed voices, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The memorial garden was finally complete. Black stone walls stretched across several acres, every inch covered with names carved in precise letters. 40,217 names, each one representing a life lost. Krelvox saw familiar faces in the crowd. Jake Morrison stood near the entrance, his body still showing scars from radiation burns. The doctors had managed to save him, but he would never be the same. His skin was discolored in places. His movements were careful, controlled, like someone who had to think about every action. Amy Cooper was there too, standing on her prosthetic legs. She had learned to walk again. Though she still used a cane for balance, she was talking to a group of younger people, probably survivors like herself. Nicole Grant attended with her therapy group. Dr. Hayes stood beside her, a quiet support. Nicole looked better than she had 2 years ago, but Krelvox could still see the pain in her eyes. Some wounds took longer to heal. Paul Davidson stood by one of the walls he had helped carve. He had spent nearly a year working on the memorial, carving thousands of names with his own hands. His fingers were permanently stained from the stone dust, and his back had developed a permanent curve from bending over his work. Linda Shaw moved through the crowd, greeting people, offering comfort. Her organization had grown into something massive, a support network that reached every corner of human space. She wore a simple dress with a pin showing her daughter's picture. Captain Helen Price stood with other military officers, all in formal uniforms. Troy Banks was there, looking slightly healthier than he had a year ago. His colleagues had finally convinced him to rest occasionally. His new warship designs were being built, but he had learned to pace himself. The ceremony began at exactly noon. No music played. No speeches started it. Everyone simply fell silent as if by unspoken agreement. The human president walked to a simple podium. She was an older woman, maybe 70 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes. She had lost a grandson in the battle. "We are gathered here to remember," she said. Her voice carried across the silent crowd. Not to celebrate victory, not to glorify war, but to remember those who gave everything so that humanity could survive. She opened a thick book and began to read. Names. Just names. One after another, spoken clearly, given weight and meaning. She read for an hour, and then another person took her place. Then another. Then another. For 4 hours, speakers read names. 40,217 names. Every single person who had died. No one was forgotten. No one was reduced to a statistic. Krelvox listened to the names and found himself crying. The Xinthian rarely cried, but something about hearing each name spoken aloud affected him deeply. These weren't numbers in a report. These were people, individuals. Each one had mattered to someone. When the last name was read, the president returned to the podium. She paused for a long moment, looking out at the crowd. "We remember," she said simply. "We honor. We grieve," that was it. No grand speeches. No patriotic declarations. Just those simple words. The crowd stood in silence for nearly an hour after the ceremony ended. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stood together, united in their grief and remembrance. Eventually, people began to move through the memorial, looking for specific names. Krelvox watched as they found the names of loved ones and touched the carved letters gently. Some cried, others stood in silence. A few spoke to the walls as if the names could hear them. An elderly woman stood beside Krelvox, looking at the walls. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, with white hair and wrinkled hands. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "Terrible, but beautiful." "Did you lose someone?" Krelvox asked. "My grandson. He was 19 years old. Wanted to be a musician. Played the guitar like you wouldn't believe. But when the call came to defend humanity, he enlisted. Died in the first wave of fighters." She pointed to a name on the wall. "There he is. Charlie Peters. He'll always be 19 now. Always young. Always full of potential that will never be realized." "I'm sorry," Krelvox said. The woman smiled sadly. "Don't be sorry. Be grateful. Charlie and all these others, they bought time for the galaxy. The harvesters would have moved on to other systems. Would have killed billions more. But humanity stopped them. Made them hesitate. Made them think twice." She touched her grandson's name gently. "These aren't just our dead, Ambassador. They're a shield for everyone. Every species in the galaxy owes them a debt, whether they know it or not." Krelvox thought about that for a long time after she walked away. He had been focused on humanity's trauma, on their suffering, on the cost they had paid. But this woman saw something bigger. She saw her grandson's death as meaningful, as part of something larger than just human survival. Later that day, Krelvox met with Linda Shaw. She had invited him to visit one of her organization's facilities, a place where veterans received ongoing care and support. The building was large but comfortable. It didn't look like a hospital or institution. It looked like a home. People sat in common areas, talking, reading, just being together. Staff moved among them, offering support when needed, but otherwise letting people heal at their own pace. Linda showed him through different sections. Therapy rooms where people worked through their trauma, workshops where veterans learned new skills, housing units for those who couldn't work or had nowhere else to go. "We started with nothing," Linda said. "Just a few people meeting in my living room. Now we have facilities like this across human space. We help thousands of people every day." "How do you fund all of this?" Krelvox asked. "Donations mostly. Humans understand that taking care of veterans isn't optional. It's a duty. People who never fought, who never lost anyone, they contribute because they know it's right. We take care of our own." They stopped in a garden where several veterans were working with plants. One of them was a young man missing both arms. He used specialized prosthetics to tend the flowers. "That's Danny," Linda said. "He was on Nicole Grant's boarding team. Lost his arms when the Harvester cruiser's systems overloaded. Spent a year in depression, wouldn't leave his room. Then he discovered gardening. Said helping things grow made him feel human again." Krelvox watched Danny work. The young man was focused, peaceful, engaged in his task. He didn't look like someone broken by war. He looked like someone who had found a way to heal. "You've built something remarkable here," Krelvox said. "We've built something necessary," Linda corrected. "War doesn't end when the shooting stops. For some people, it never ends. We can't fix that, but we can make sure nobody faces it alone." That evening, Krelvox attended a dinner with several of the people he had come to know. Jake Morrison, Amy Cooper, Nicole Grant, Paul Davidson, Helen Price, Troy Banks, and others. They gathered in a private room, sharing a meal and conversation. The talk was surprisingly light. People laughed. They told jokes. They shared stories. Not war stories, but normal stories about their lives, about their hopes and plans for the future. Krelvox realized this was part of healing too. The ability to be normal, to laugh despite the pain, to plan for a future that once seemed impossible. Near the end of the meal, Paul Davidson raised a glass. A toast. To those who aren't here, to those who gave everything, to those we'll never forget. Everyone raised their glasses. To the fallen, they said together. The moment was solemn but not depressing. It felt right. A way to honor the dead while continuing to live. After dinner, Krelvox walked back to the memorial alone. Night had fallen and lights illuminated the walls of names. They glowed softly in the darkness like stars. He stood there for hours looking at the names. 40,217. Each one a person. Each one a story. Each one a life that mattered. He thought about the battle he had watched. The desperate fight. The impossible victory. The terrible cost. And he thought about everything that came after. The wounded. The traumatized. The grieving. The slow, painful process of healing. Most species would have hidden this. They would have glorified the victory and minimized the cost. They would have turned the battle into propaganda, the dead into heroes who died gloriously. But humans did neither. They faced the reality of what happened. They acknowledged both the necessity of the fight and the horror of it. They honored their dead by remembering them honestly, not by turning them into symbols. A young couple walked past holding hands.